The red glow of the Tactical Operations Center cast long, distorted shadows on the faces of men accustomed to control. Tonight, control was a phantom. Static crackled through the main speakers, a harsh counterpoint to the rhythmic drumming of a furious storm against the reinforced concrete roof. On the central screen, a satellite feed showed a cluster of infrared signatures, pinned down in a narrow, unforgiving valley deep in contested territory. 9 signatures. There had been 12. Colonel Marcus Hayes stared at the display, his jaw a knot of granite. The veins on his temples pulsed in time with the blinking icons. He had sent those men in. He had approved the mission. Trident lead, this is Overlord. Report status. Over his voice was a low growl, stripped of its usual parade ground authority. The reply was a burst of garbled noise, punctuated by the unmistakable, terrifyingly close chatter of enemy machine gun fire. Then, a voice, strained and breathless. Overlord, Trident lead. We are fixed. Pinned from 3 sides. Objective is a bust. Repeat, objective is a bust. Heavy contact. Enemy numbers. Overwhelming. Requesting immediate extraction. How copy? Hayes gripped the edge of the console, his knuckles white. Trident lead, be advised. Extraction is not possible at this time. The storm front has moved in faster than projected. Air assets are grounded. The ceiling is 0 and the wind shear in that valley. It's a death trap. He hated the words as they left his mouth. They tasted like ash. He was sentencing his best men to death. A long, heavy silence stretched across the comms, broken only by the distant, furious sounds of the firefight. Copy that, Overlord. The SEAL's voice was hollow, stripped of all hope. We understand. Tell them. Tell them we held the line. Then another voice, younger, cut in with raw panic. They're massing on the northern ridge. They're bringing up something heavy. The transmission ended in a sharp crackle and then nothing. The 9 signatures on the screen flickered. One winked out. Hayes slammed his fist on the console. Get me a weather update. I want a 10-minute window, a 5-minute window. Anything. The meteorologist, a nervous-looking lieutenant, just shook his head, avoiding the colonel's gaze. In the back of the room, away from the central hub of frantic energy, Major Anya Rostova stood motionless. She was a ghost in a flight suit, her presence barely registering to the men focused on the dying embers of a failed mission. Her eyes, a cool, calculating gray, were fixed on a secondary monitor displaying a topographical map of the valley system. She saw not a coffin but a corridor, not a wall of granite but a path. She had been in the TOC for 3 hours, a silent observer since her own scheduled reconnaissance flight had been scrubbed due to the storm. She was grounded, a pilot with no plane to fly, a warrior with no war to fight. She listened to the grim finality in the SEAL's voice, felt the suffocating despair in the room, and a cold, quiet certainty began to form in her mind. The men in this room had run out of options. She was the only one left. She stepped forward, her boots making no sound on the polished floor. Her movement was fluid, economical, drawing the first real notice from the colonel as she entered the ring of light around the main console. He turned, his eyes bloodshot with stress and anger, and looked down at her. He saw a major with a decorated but controversial service record, a pilot known for her unorthodox methods, a woman who had been repeatedly passed over for command. He saw a problem. Major Rostova, his tone was sharp, dismissive. If you don't have a function here, I suggest you return to the pilot's ready room. This is a closed briefing. Anya ignored the rebuke. Her gaze remained on the topographical map. Sir, the weather data shows a stable inversion layer at 300 feet within the Gorgon's Maw Canyon system. The wind shear is violent at the mouth, but the Venturi effect should stabilize it further in. There's a possible ingress route. A narrow one, but it's there. Hayes stared at her as if she'd sprouted a second head. Gorgon's Maw? Are you insane? That's a rock-lined ditch barely wide enough for a single aircraft, and that's on a clear day. Tonight, in this storm, it's suicide. We're not throwing away a $200 million Raptor on a ghost of a chance. His voice dripped with condescension. He was speaking to her as if she were a child who didn't understand the stakes. The Raptor can handle it, she stated simply. It wasn't a boast. It was a fact. A senior SEAL liaison officer, a commander with salt and pepper hair and a grim face, shook his head. The team on the ground already called it, Colonel. They're compromised. It's over. Sending in a lone bird won't change the outcome. It'll just add another name to the casualty list. His voice was heavy with the pragmatism of a man who had seen too many good men die for lost causes. Hayes nodded, turning his back on Anya. A clear dismissal. He's right. This isn't a simulator, Major. We don't get to hit the reset button. We live and die with the consequences of our decisions. And the decision here is to not compound this tragedy. He pointed a finger at the comms officer. Get a message to the QRF. Have them prepare for a body recovery mission at dawn. If the weather breaks. The finality of his words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Body recovery. The 8 remaining infrared signatures on the screen seemed to shrink, their faint heat a fleeting testament to the lives about to be extinguished. Anya stood her ground for a moment longer, her gray eyes locking onto the colonel's reflection in the dark screen. He refused to meet her gaze. He had made his decision. He had accepted the loss. She hadn't. With a quiet, almost imperceptible nod to herself, she turned and walked out of the TOC. The heavy door hissed shut behind her, sealing the command staff in their tomb of resignation. Her footsteps echoed down the empty corridor, each one a measured beat of defiance against the storm raging both outside and in. She was heading for the one place where protocol and pessimism held no sway. The walk to the hardened aircraft shelter was a battle against the elements. Wind-driven rain slanted sideways, hitting with the force of thrown gravel. The air smelled of ozone and wet earth. Inside has 7. The storm was a muted roar, a distant beast clawing at the thick concrete walls. The cavernous space was filled with the familiar, comforting sense of hydraulic fluid, jet fuel, and ionized air. Her F-22 Raptor, tail number AF09-4189, sat in the center of the bay, a dormant predator of composite skin and sharp angles, bathed in the cool, sterile light of the overhead lamps. Master Sergeant Cole, her crew chief, was waiting by the cockpit ladder, a thermos of coffee in one hand and a data tablet in the other. He was a man of few words and unshakable loyalty, with lines etched around his eyes from 20 years of squinting at diagnostic screens and desert horizons. Heard the colonel put a lid on all flight ops, Cole said, his voice a low rumble that was easily absorbed by the vastness of the hangar. He didn't ask a question, he made a statement. He knew her better than anyone on this base. Run the final pre-flight diagnostics, Chief, Anya replied, her voice calm and even. She began pulling on her flight gloves, the motions precise and ingrained from thousands of repetitions. I want a full systems check, with special attention to the terrain-following radar and the low-altitude navigation pods. Cole didn't argue. He didn't question the order or warn her about the consequences of disobeying the colonel's grounding order. He had seen her fly in conditions that made other pilots sick. He had seen her pull maneuvers that belonged in physics textbooks, not the sky. He simply nodded, a slow, knowing gesture. Already done, Major. She's green across the board. Topped her off myself. Figured you might get restless. He tapped a sequence into his tablet, and the jet's auxiliary power unit whined to life, a low hum that seemed to make the very air in the hangar vibrate. Anya walked the perimeter of her aircraft, a ritual she performed before every flight. Her gloved hand trailed along the leading edge of the wing, feeling the cold, smooth skin of the machine. This was more than a jet to her. It was a legacy. Near the cockpit canopy, just below her name, was a small, hand-painted marking, no bigger than her thumb. It was a single, exquisitely detailed gray feather, the wing feather of a Valkyrie. It wasn't regulation. It was a quiet tribute to her father, a legendary test pilot from the F-22 program, whose callsign had been Odin. He had been the one to first push this airframe to its absolute limits, to dance on the edge of controlled flight and chaos. He had taught her not just how to fly, but how to listen to the machine, to feel the air as an extension of her own senses. She climbed the ladder and settled into the cockpit, the seat molding around her as if it were an extension of her own body. The familiar sequence of actions was a calming litany. The click of the harness buckles, the hiss of the canopy sealing her into her own world, the soft hum of the avionics coming online. The cockpit lit up around her, a constellation of green and amber light reflected in her visor. She flexed her hands on the control stick, feeling the faint, responsive tremor of the flight surfaces. She was no longer just Major Anya Rostova. She was Valkyrie 1. Cole's voice crackled in her helmet. Tower's been advised of an emergency systems calibration test. They won't be expecting a launch. You've got a 5-minute window before the colonel's phone starts ringing. Copy that, Chief, she said. Thank you. Give him hell, Major. Cole's voice came back, the gruff words carrying a weight of trust that no medal or commendation ever could. Bring the bird home. The hangar doors began to grind open, revealing a wall of black, swirling rain. Anya took a deep, steadying breath, her fingers dancing across the controls. The world outside was chaos. In here, there was only purpose. The F-22 shot out of the hangar and into the raging storm like an arrow released from a bow. The takeoff was a controlled explosion, a brutal assertion of power against the gale force crosswinds that tried to shove the aircraft off the runway. In the TOC, a junior controller yelped in surprise. Sir, I have an unauthorized launch from Hes 7. It's a Raptor. Colonel Hayes spun around, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. Get me Rostova. Get her on the horn now. Order her to stand down. But Anya was already gone. She kept the jet low, a gray phantom against the dark, churning underbelly of the storm clouds. She cut off her transponder and went dark, disappearing from the main tactical displays. All Hayes could see was a fleeting primary radar return before it vanished into the ground clutter. She was flying below their sight, and below the storm's worst fury. Inside the cockpit, the world was a maelstrom of violent motion and screaming alarms. Rain hammered against the canopy with the sound of 1,000 drums. The jet bucked and shuddered as vicious pockets of turbulence grabbed at the wings. The ground proximity warning system blared a computerized, frantic chant. Terrain. Pull up. Terrain. Pull up. Anya ignored it. Her eyes were locked on the holographic display of the head-up display, her hands making constant, minute adjustments to the stick and throttle. She was not flying the plane. She was wearing it. She pushed the Raptor into the narrow opening of the Gorgon's maw. The canyon walls rose up on either side of her, sheer cliffs of black rock made slick with rain, so close she felt she could reach out and touch them. The radar altimeter fluctuated wildly, reading less than 200 feet. The powerful engines roared, the sound trapped and amplified between the rock walls into a deafening crescendo. This was a place no sane pilot would ever go, a flight profile that existed only in the most extreme training simulations. But her father had taught her that a machine's limits were only suggestions. The true boundaries were set by the pilot's will and instinct. She flew not by sight. There was nothing to see but a blur of darkness and rain, but by the glowing green lines of the terrain-following radar projected onto her visor. She threaded the needle, banking sharply around jagged rock formations that appeared out of the gloom with milliseconds to spare. The jet was an extension of her body, the canyon a complex vein she was navigating by feel. For 10 agonizing minutes, she was in the belly of the beast. The stress was immense, a physical weight pressing down on her, but her breathing remained slow and steady, her heart rate a disciplined rhythm. Then, as suddenly as it began, the canyon walls fell away. She burst out of the maw and into the small, bowl-shaped valley beyond. The storm was still raging, but below her, through a momentary break in the clouds, she saw it. The muzzle flashes of a desperate firefight. She was here. The hunt had begun. On the ground, what was left of Trident Team was making its last stand behind a meager cluster of rocks. They were down to their last magazines. The enemy, a well-armed insurgent force, was closing in, emboldened by the storm and the silence from the sky. Petty Officer First Class Echo 3 jammed a fresh magazine into his rifle and peered over his cover. He was 24 years old, and he was sure he was about to die. The air was thick with the smell of cordite and wet mud. The enemy's heavy machine gun on the northern ridge had them completely suppressed, its relentless hammering chewing up their position piece by piece. Their team leader was on the ground, bleeding from a shrapnel wound to the leg. It was over. Then he heard it. A new sound, deeper and more terrifying than the thunder. It wasn't the familiar whump-whump of a rescue helicopter. It was a visceral, guttural roar that seemed to tear the very fabric of the sky. He looked up, squinting through the rain. A shape, a sliver of absolute blackness against the gray clouds, flashed overhead. It was moving faster than anything he had ever seen. Inside Valkyrie 1's cockpit, Anya's helmet-mounted display painted the world in stark, tactical relief. Friendly forces were highlighted in blue, enemy in red. The battlefield was laid out before her like a map. Her systems immediately tagged the primary threat. The heavy machine gun nest on the ridge, spitting a stream of red tracers toward the pin seals. Dropping a bomb was too risky. The blast radius could endanger the friendlies. This required a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. She rolled the Raptor onto its side, pulling it into a tight, descending spiral. The G-force pressed her deep into her seat. Her thumb moved to the weapon's control stick, selecting the M61 Vulcan cannon. She lined up the shot, the targeting reticle on her HUD glowing green as it locked onto the heat signature of the gun. The world seemed to slow down. She could see every tracer, every muzzle flash, every desperate blue icon huddled behind the rocks. Valkyrie engaging Northern Ridge, she transmitted on the SEAL's frequency, her voice an oasis of calm in the storm of their comms. She squeezed the trigger. For a single, brutal second, the cannon erupted. The sound was not a gunshot. It was the sound of reality being ripped apart. A stream of 20mm armor-piercing incendiary rounds, fired at a rate of 100 per second, slammed into the rock emplacement. The machine gun, the crew, and the rock around them disintegrated in a flash of white-hot light and pulverized stone. The deafening hammer of the enemy gun was replaced by an even more deafening silence. Echo 3 stared, his mouth agape. The threat that had been about to extinguish them was simply gone. Wiped from existence. The enemy fighters, who had been advancing with confidence, now scrambled for cover, their attack broken, their morale shattered. Jesus Christ! He breathed into his calm. Who the hell is that? His team leader, propped up on one elbow, just stared at the sky. That, he whispered, is an angel. The brief respite was shattered by a new, more lethal threat. The insurgent commander, realizing his conventional forces were outmatched by this ghost in the storm, had played his ace. From a concealed cave on the western face of the valley, a team of operators emerged, shouldering a sophisticated man-portable air defense system, a late-generation manpads. They had been waiting for an air asset, a fat, slow helicopter. Instead, they had a Phantom, but a Phantom could still bleed. In the TOC, Colonel Hayes watched the impossible unfold on a reconstructed data link feed patched together from Rostova's fleeting emissions. He saw the machine gun nest vanish. He heard her impossibly calm voice on the comms. His fury was slowly being replaced by a dawning, grudging awe. "Who is this pilot?" he demanded of the liaison officer beside him. The officer was already pulling up a file on a side screen. "Major Anya Rostova, sir. Call sign Valkyrie." The name hung in the air for a moment. Hayes felt a flicker of recognition, a name from old stories and after-action reports he'd dismissed as hangar legends. Just then, a new icon flashed on the tactical display. A fast-moving heat signature lifting off from the western ridge, streaking directly towards Valkyrie 1's icon. "Missile launch! Missile launch!" the tactical officer yelled. Hayes grabbed the microphone. "Valkyrie 1, this is Overlord. You have a missile inbound. Bearing 270. The warning tone was already screaming in Anya's cockpit. a high-pitched shriek that cut through the roar of the engines. The display flashed a red arrow, indicating the incoming threat. She was low, trapped in the valley with nowhere to run. A standard evasive maneuver, a hard bank and a cloud of flares, wouldn't work. The missile seeker head was too advanced, and the canyon walls boxed her in, leaving no room to maneuver. The enemy had chosen their firing position perfectly. They had turned her sanctuary into a trap. There was only one option, a maneuver that wasn't in any official flight manual. A high-risk, high-G move her father had perfected in the early days of the program, a way to use the Raptor's unique thrust-vectoring capabilities to defy the laws of aerodynamics. It was a move designed to test the limits of the airframe and the pilot. A move she hadn't practiced outside of a simulator in years. "Valkyrie is defensive," she stated, her voice betraying no hint of the immense pressure she was under. She cut the throttle, pulling the stick back hard into her lap. The Raptor's nose pitched up violently, the thrust-vectoring nozzles directing the engine power to force the jet into an impossibly steep climb. The aircraft, which had been streaking forward at over 600 miles per hour, suddenly behaved as if it had slammed into an invisible wall. From the ground, Echo 3 watched in stunned disbelief. The dark fighter jet, which had been a blur of motion, abruptly stood on its tail, seemingly hanging motionless in the stormy sky for a heartbeat. It was a Cobra poised to strike. Airspeed bled off at a catastrophic rate, alarms blaring in the cockpit as the flight computer fought against the intentional, controlled stall. The incoming missile, locked onto the jet's forward momentum, couldn't compensate for the sudden, drastic change in velocity. It shot past, overshooting its target by 100 yards, its primitive logic utterly defeated. The missile, now without a target, slammed into the opposite canyon wall in a brilliant, fiery explosion that momentarily lit up the entire valley. In the TOC, the flight dynamics officer stared at his screen, his jaw slack. "Sir, that was a Pugachev's Cobra. At low altitude." In a storm, he looked at Hayes, his eyes wide. "Nobody does that. That's a test pilot maneuver. That's an airshow maneuver. It's not supposed to be possible in a combat situation." Hayes finally understood. He remembered the old files, the whispers about Odin's daughter. The girl who had practically grown up in a cockpit, who could feel the airflow over the wings. She wasn't just a pilot. She was a prodigy. He keyed the mic again, his voice now devoid of anger, filled only with a focused urgency. "Valkyrie, your status." Anya pushed the stick forward, the engines roaring back to full power as the Raptor's nose dropped, seamlessly transitioning from the post-stall maneuver back into controlled flight. The whole event had taken less than 5 seconds. "Status is green, Overlord," she replied, her breathing perfectly even. "Targeting the missile team's point of origin. Recommend you get that extraction bird in the air. I'm clearing a path." With the immediate threat neutralized, Anya went on the offensive. The missile launch had been a fatal mistake for the enemy. It had given away their best hidden position. She banked the F-22, the memory of the missile's trajectory painting a clear line back to the cave on the western ridge. She selected a GBU-39 small-diameter bomb, a small, precise weapon designed for minimal collateral damage. The bomb bay doors snapped open for less than a second as the weapon was released. It fell silently, guided by GPS and its own small wings, an instrument of unerring judgment. It didn't strike the cave mouth. It struck the rock face directly above it. The resulting explosion was contained but powerful, triggering a rock slide that sealed the cave entrance permanently under thousands of tons of stone. The extraction helicopter, a Pave-Low, was already inbound, its crew listening in awe to the comms traffic. "Valkyrie, this is Jolly 1. We are 5 mics out, approaching from the south." "Copy, Jolly 1. Anya's voice responded, a steadying presence in their headsets. "The landing zone is hot. I will sanitize. Stay low and follow my lead." For the next 5 minutes, Valkyrie 1 became the valley's avenging spirit. She flew a relentless, terrifying pattern over the battlefield. She didn't need to use her weapons again. The sheer presence of the advanced fighter, appearing and disappearing in the rain and clouds, its engines a thunderous promise of instant death, was enough. The remaining insurgent fighters broke and fled, melting back into the mountains from whence they came. By the time the Pave-Low's heavy rotors thundered into the valley, the battlefield was silent except for the wind and the rain. Anya circled high above as the helicopter touched down. She watched the blue icons of the SEALs scramble aboard, helping their wounded leader. Her sensors confirmed it. 8 souls on board. 8 survivors. Not 8 bodies to be recovered. The Pave-Low lifted off, its gunners keeping a wary eye on the surrounding ridges. Anya fell in behind it, flying a protective escort pattern. Overlord, this is Trident Lead. The SEAL's voice crackled over the command net, filled with a mixture of exhaustion and profound gratitude. We are away. All personnel accounted for. To the pilot of Valkyrie 1. Thank you. We owe you our lives. Anya keyed her mic. Glad you could make it, Trident Lead. Valkyrie is returning to base. She banked the Raptor, turning it back towards the Gorgon's maw. The flight back was just as treacherous, but this time it felt different. The canyon was no longer a coffin. It was a passage home. The tarmac was slick and black under the harsh glare of the floodlights as the Pave-Low touched down. The rear ramp lowered and the 8 battered, grime-covered SEALs emerged, moving with the weary stiffness of men who had walked to the edge of death and back. Medics rushed forward, but the SEALs waved them off for a moment, their attention fixed elsewhere. A short distance away, parked in the shimmering rain, was the F-22. Its engines were spooling down with a series of soft whines and clicks, and steam rose from its hot fuselage. The canopy hissed open, and a figure in a flight suit climbed down the ladder with an economy of motion that belied the incredible feat she had just performed. Colonel Hayes was waiting for her. He stood in the rain without a coat, Master Sergeant Cole a respectful step behind him. As Anya pulled off her helmet, shaking her dark hair free, the SEALs stopped. Echo 3, his face streaked with mud and a field dressing on his arm, watched her approach. He had expected a grizzled veteran, a swaggering ace. He saw a woman of average height, her face pale with fatigue but her gray eyes clear and steady. Hayes met her halfway. The rain dripped from the brim of his cap. He was silent for a long time, the sounds of the base, the distant whine of a generator, the clank of equipment, filling the space between them. He looked past her, at the small gray feather painted on the side of her jet. The symbol suddenly made a terrifying amount of sense. The old test pilots at Edwards, Hayes began, his voice quiet, stripped of all its earlier arrogance. They had a name for your father. Odin, they said he was a force of nature. Said he could talk to the sky. Anya simply nodded, her expression unreadable. She offered no confirmation, no denial. They had a name for his daughter, too, Hayes continued, his eyes finally meeting hers. The one who broke every record in the simulator before she was old enough to legally drive. Valkyrie, a chooser of the slain, a bringer of warriors home. He shook his head slowly, a look of profound, humbled realization on his face. I see why. He extended his hand. Major Rostova, you were grounded. You disobeyed a direct order. You risked a multimillion-dollar asset. And you saved 8 of my men. He paused. I have never been so happy to be so wrong. She took his hand. Her grip was firm, professional. There was no triumph in her eyes, only a quiet sense of duty fulfilled. Echo 3 broke away from his team and walked towards her. He stopped a few feet away, his exhaustion and injuries forgotten. He looked from his rescued comrades to this quiet pilot who had descended from the storm. Words were inadequate. Protocol was insufficient. So he did the only thing that felt right. He brought his hand up in a slow, deliberate, perfect salute. It was more than a gesture of military courtesy. It was an act of reverence. The other 7 SEALs, seeing their teammate, followed suit. 8 men, the best warriors the nation could produce, stood in the rain and saluted the pilot who had refused to let them die. Anya met Echo 3's gaze and returned the gesture with a single, crisp nod. The respect was silent, absolute and earned in thunder and fire. Hours later, the storm had passed, leaving behind a sky washed clean and studded with stars. The base had settled into the quiet hum of its nightly routine. In the sterile, echoing space of Has 7, Anya stood beside her aircraft. The Raptor was quiet now, the only sound the occasional metallic tick and groan of its cooling engines. Patches of its skin were scorched, and the leading edges of its wings were abraded from its violent passage through the canyon. But it was whole. It was home. Master Sergeant Cole was running a final post-flight check, his movements practiced and soothingly familiar. "She took a hell of a beating, Major," Cole said, not looking up from his data pad. "The stress sensors in the wing roots are lit up like a Christmas tree. But nothing's fractured. Your father would have been proud. He always said this bird had a soul." Anya didn't reply. She ran her bare hand along the cool, smooth curve of the jet's fuselage, a gesture that was both an inspection and a caress. This machine of war, this marvel of engineering, felt less like a tool and more like a partner. They had faced the storm together and emerged victorious. She stopped at the cockpit, her fingers tracing the outline of the small, gray feather. It was a legacy, not a name to live up to, but a standard to uphold. The standard of pushing limits, of refusing to accept the impossible, of bringing the warriors home. She looked out through the open hangar doors at the peaceful, starry sky. The chaos was over. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep weariness and a quiet, solid sense of satisfaction. There would be an inquiry. A reprimand would be placed in her file, another black mark in a career full of them. Colonel Hayes would have to answer for the unauthorized flight. But none of it mattered. Tonight, the legend of Valkyrie was no longer a half-forgotten rumor whispered in briefing rooms and maintenance bays. It was a truth, written in the sky, witnessed by dying men, and etched into the memory of a humbled colonel. Anya stood in the quiet hangar, a silent guardian beside her resting steed, bathed in the soft glow of the maintenance lights. Dignity needed no announcement. Competence required no applause. The mission was complete.